So my guest this morning is Emily Orton, who's the co-founder of Darktrace. Darktrace is a company which uses machine learning for cybersecurity, including automated response to cyber attacks. The company was founded in 2013 and is now worth, I think, about $1 billion. So you've done pretty well for yourselves. So Darktrace brought together a group of mathematicians from the University of Cambridge and cyber defense experts from various government agencies. So basically scholars and spies.
Yes.
So what was the expertise they both brought, and how did you combine them in Darktrace?
Yeah, it was an interesting mix. We are an AI company, so of course, critically, we were founded by mathematicians with expertise in machine learning, and Cambridge is a hub for that. But they got together with a number of experts from government intelligence, people who'd been working in the security agencies on the defensive and offensive side, and had real-world knowledge of how we were dealing with very sophisticated cyber attacks, mainly sort of against the national infrastructure, but also they had some responsibility for to making sure that critical infrastructure, including private sector, was protected, and that was a frustrating task for a number of them. The tools that they had available to them were very limited, and really based around trying to keep threats off networks. And so a lot of the focus and the tools and products were helping them do that, and yet increasingly the situation was that these companies were infiltrated to severe extent.
And these were usually known attacks, right? Types of attacks that had been seen already that experts were able to recognize.
Well, actually, it was more difficult dealing with very sophisticated unknown attacks. And so just coming back to kind of the founding story, the machine learning experts trying to solve real-world problems using self-learning systems, and we've seen AI being talked about and applied to a number of arenas. But cybersecurity was a very specific challenge because we didn't know all the threats that were going to happen tomorrow, the day after.
They're constantly changing.
They're constantly changing, absolutely. And so whilst you can, of course, pre-identify and do a lot of work in identifying attacks, predicting them, trying to stop them tomorrow, and that's still ongoing today. What was really challenging was when you had a very sophisticated, advanced threat that's using completely different code, something that's never going to turn up on an antivirus search, on threat intelligence. Or, of course, the other aspect is those employees or legitimate people inside the network who are already in. That was really a tough challenge.
So explain to us at a high level how Darktrace works, how it uses machine learning to counteract these threats.
Sure. So we actually modeled the AI system that we built on the principles of the human immune system. So to explain that a little, if you think about the way the human body defends itself continually, it's actually very, very complex and advanced. Of course, we have a protective barrier. We have skin that makes sure that we don't get sort of obvious threats or dirt into our systems. But we have internal threat all the time. Bacteria, virus gets in. We know that's a fact of life. And that would be a problem if it weren't for our human immune system, which deals with that. It learns what's part of my environment and what's different. And it's very, very sophisticated and adaptive and catches unknown viruses and bacteria and can deal with those. And a response is generated, you have antibodies, and it's solved. Not a perfect system. We all get colds, and some of us fall ill from time to time. But it's a very, very effective system overall. We wouldn't be able to survive without it. So we wanted to apply that principle using machine learning and actually taking AI algorithms that were designed not to look for a specific predefined notion of what malicious was, because we didn't know what that was, but rather to learn within the environment, look at what's going on, and create what we call a pattern of life for every device and for every user inside that organization. And that's an evolving pattern of life because we change behaviors and we're constantly adapting. And this ability to learn what we call self enabled our AI system to essentially identify deviations that were brand new and novel and then deal with that.
So you learn what is currently normal behavior, and then you detect anomalies from that normal behavior, and your definition of normal is constantly evolving. That's what it seems like.
Exactly.
So how are the attacks themselves evolving? Like, which ones are getting more sophisticated? What completely new types of attacks are coming up?
Well, it's a broad picture. We have seen over the sort of 10, 15 years, definitely an industrialization of the threat landscape and a sophistication, as I've mentioned. I think we read a lot about data breaches and databases getting stolen and sold on the dark web and monetized. But we've moved on a lot from that kind of attack now, and they're getting more devious, and there's lots of motivations. Let me talk about a couple of them. Ransomware is obviously something that probably a lot of us have heard about, with WannaCry last year happening and others since. And that's a very challenging attack type because it's happening so very quickly.
Because it's mainly automated.
Right. So the emergence of automated threats is a big worry. 20 seconds and you can have a network down. How do you deal with that? How does anyone respond quick enough? And
I heard that ransomware attacks are now attacking backups of data as well. So they not only encrypt the data that they're targeting, but the backup also.
Right. So where do you go from there? Yeah, absolutely. And I think with ransomware, it really is the tip of the iceberg in terms of what automation can do on the offensive side. And actually, ransomware is fairly sort of quite easy to detect in some senses. It triggers all the alarms. It's very, very weird behavior going on. The problem is responding quick enough. We can talk about that later, but that's a real speed issue. I think what's really concerning is that the level of infiltration that companies have, the presence that they have from a foreign party that they don't understand, which has been there for a long time, but they don't know about.
So I read in one of your reports that often you will go into a company and they will discover that there's a third more devices on the network that they ever even knew were there.
Yes. Because the network has got much bigger, and so the attack surface is absolutely massive. And yeah, absolutely, we go in and our system will automatically find out, what are the devices on the network, and we'll say, okay, so you have 10,000 devices on your network, and you can see that the security officer has 6,000 written down on his asset register. It's like, where are the other 4,000 coming from? These are big differences.
Yes.
And it's coming from the air conditioning unit, all of the printers, the Fitbits that have come into the office, the iPads, it's all this infrastructure, and it's affecting the way they do security.
So you have new points of entry for hackers into a corporate network. Mm-hmm. So you had a couple of really interesting examples. Can you tell us about the famous fish tank?
Okay, so the fish tank's the one that sort of gets the attention. I mean, who would have thought a fish tank would be used by an attacker? But the reality is it's connected to the internet, so it's fair game. And it's a fairly good guess that perhaps is a more vulnerable a device in the network. It's not protected with some of the more elementary protections that your laptops might be protected by. And in this case, the attacker was just using it as a stepping stone and wanted to get onto the corporate network, was looking at...
And this was the corporate network of a casino, right? So there's a lot of money as well as data involved there.
That's right. And also a number of clients that perhaps would want to be confidential, that might be spending large amounts of money with the institution. So certainly very damaging reputationally for that organization. And it's a gift that's going to keep on giving for the attackers because there's so much out there. I'll give you another example which touches on the idea of a very stealthy attack as well. So we had, it was a law firm, and they had a number of conference rooms, and what we found was some unusual behavior pertaining to a particular device. We said, hey, this, you might want to check this device. We think it's behaving in a slightly weird way given what we know about it. Once they tracked it down, they found that it was actually the audio conferencing unit within the boardroom. And we'd found that audio files were being sent out to a server that they didn't recognize, that we had no knowledge of. Obviously,
somebody was listening in on these board meetings in the law firm.
Right, so someone had some very confidential meeting information in audio files. And the clever thing was that they were actually sending those files very slowly. They weren't
so it wasn't very noticeable.
Right, so they wanted to be under the radar. There was very much deliberate attempt to make sure that this wasn't a sudden big spike in exfiltration, but it was slowly done to deliberately to evade their existing systems.
And actually, talking about law firms, one of the things you told me in the prep call, which hadn't occurred to me, was that law firms are often seen as a target to get to the data of their clients. So can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, supply chain overall is very vulnerable because you've got all these links, and you only need one weak link to affect the whole system. Law firms, but other agencies providing services to perhaps a more mature organization that would have better defenses, they're going to be targeted and used, and even for things like competitive insights, and we've seen economic espionage now happening. Much easier to do it in the cyberspace than try and send in a mole and try and grab that particular.
Yeah, you just listen to the audio in the boardroom, and then you're done.
Yeah.
What about new forms of attack? I know that crypto hacking is a new one the last year or two.
Yeah, we did some research actually, and there are 5,000 deployments of what we call the enterprise immune system, our technology. And we actually looked into what kind of things it was finding. About 25% of our customer base had signs of cryptocurrency mining.
Wow.
So this is where we know Bitcoin mining is very lucrative. But in order to do that very fast and to get those Bitcoin and other alternative currencies, you need computing power. Okay, so if you're running a small operation, unless you have, seriously invested, you're going to be pretty limited. And so what attackers are doing is they're going into companies, often banks, and actually hijacking computing power in order to mine for Bitcoin. And the crazy thing is these things can be going on for months on end without the organization actually realizing. And they're continuing to do their jobs every day. They're going into the office, but actually a significant part of their computing power is being taken, which is obviously costing them money. But more worrying is they have, several, presences in their network, and who knows what they're going to do in the future, and that's obviously a massive compromiser.
Well, why banks? That's a bit of an ironic one, considering that they manage money and people are stealing their infrastructure.
Yeah, and I should say it does happen to, at the end of the day, computers are computers, and they're going to be able to do this. But one of the, we certainly have instances of banking infrastructures where, these are big networks. Okay. So to expropriate perhaps a part of it is more likely to go unseen, perhaps, than in a smaller organization.
Makes sense. And you had one instance, I think, in a European bank where somebody had buried a device underneath the floorboards in the server room or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I could literally go on all day about the sort of things we found. But yeah, that was someone who'd actually physically plugged in a server and actually put it under the floorboards. And we took a while with the customer because we sort of said, we're sure this device exists because we can see the activity. And they were like, no, that doesn't exist. It wasn't a legitimate device, and it was plugged into the server room.
Mad. Another form of attack that we discussed was also related to financial services, attacks on data integrity, which is another one that I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah. Yeah, this comes back to this idea of the sophistication, and depending on your motivation, you might not be after a quick monetary gain, but actually want to do more long-term impact. And clearly, at the sophisticated state-sponsored end, we've heard a lot about the eroding of confidence in systems, and even to the point of democratic systems and voting. And I think that's the real worry for a chief security officer today. What if you're not taking anything, but just changing a few elements of data within a large data set? If you're a bank and you have bank balances, which you will, and 100 of them get changed, but you don't know which 100.
Yeah.
Well, how do you deal with that situation?
Which is almost as good as the whole thing being changed.
Right.
Because you don't
the
know
whole
which ones have been
system
tampered
gets
with.
impacted. Healthcare is a massive one. In the US, there's been a number of threats in this area. And again, the idea that a healthcare company could continue to sell patient care whilst not knowing whether their blood type data is accurate or test results are accurate. Well, this is systemic damage, it's long-term damage, And it should be sort of very high on our priority list.
Well, you can certainly see for a bank, I mean, that could completely take down a bank if people lose confidence in the fact that the data about their money is being managed properly.
Absolutely. It's essentially an attack on trust, and it can be, the effect is going to be large on kind of populations if particular countries are attacked. And even we're seeing it in the criminal space as well. We had an example of a manufacturer, and they had a physical premises that was protected by biometric scanners, so that only privileged personnel were able to enter and actually have access to the machinery. Makes good sense, and you know, they took this seriously. But in their case, that device was compromised. Someone had got on the corporate network, had compromised the actual biometric scanner, and changed data.
So someone else could basically access the facility.
Exactly. So they'd actually taken off fingerprint data that was legitimately stored there to recognize privileged personnel and replaced it, presumably with their own.
That's pretty scary.
It is pretty scary.
Tell me about Darktrace Antigena, which is your automated response product, which allows you to automatically respond to attacks like ransomware.
Yeah, well, this is really exciting. This is a new category of AI. It's called autonomous response. So we talk about autonomous cars. We all know about the idea of autonomous systems, but I think nowhere more perhaps pertinent for this is in cybersecurity, where if you can't respond at computer speed to an attack that's using AI and is running at computer speed, then you're going to lose that battle. So it's been really important that we automate more and we automate the response side. And so what Darktrace has done is developed in the last couple of years. We call it Antigena, and what that's doing is it's saying, I know this is a high severity threat, I have very high confidence that this is threatening, is going to potentially cause you damage, and I'm going to generate a response to that, and that's entirely autonomous. So you could be, driving home for the weekend, you could be asleep in your bed, and that machine is going to know the appropriate response to take.
So what kind of actions can it take?
So for example, ransomware is a big one at the moment. And for that, it would identify the connections that piece of malware is making and actually forcibly drop them. What it's actually doing, the way it works, is because it knows the pattern of life. It knows this device normally behaves in this way. You normally use your computer in this way. It just enforces that. It says everything that's normal, I'm going to enforce, I'm going to allow. And anything that's outside of that, I'm going to stop, and I might temporarily stop it.
So it doesn't completely shut down access to the server or the machine or whatever?
No, and that's absolutely critical.
Oh, okay.
Because no business wants to be disrupted. No CEO wants to get into the office and can't access their emails. So it's really important that this doesn't disrupt day-to-day business. This is about essentially buying your security team time. You've got humans against machines, and you need to buy them time and use a machine to do that response in the first phase.
So this is similar, really, to what your credit card company does. If you go off and make a really unusual purchase, it might block. Well, in that case, it blocks the card entirely, so you can't use it. So this is more flexible.
Yeah, it's more flexible, and it's customizable. So you might say, look, I'm really worried about insider threat. If any of my employees, breaches, their pattern of life, I'm really worried about that. Other companies might say, I'm happy to, look at that manually. I want to start on particular malwares that are very fast moving. So it's very customizable, and it's interesting because, this is the frontier of cyber defense. Letting machines take actions without you being there is a big step. And so we realized when we developed it that we needed to create new features that allowed people to go on that journey in stages and actually build trust in the machine. And I think this applies with all AI where we're stepping into an autonomous vehicle. I'm not sure if I do that right now because I'm not sure my trust is high enough. And so with our customers, we very much found that they needed to build trust. And so we built a mobile app, and we said, we're going to tell you the response
what action we're going to take.
But you're going to say, OK. And you're going to say, yep, I'm OK with response. I'm still saving you time, but you're able to manually validate that. And over a period of time, what we discovered is, of course, they built trust that the system was taking the right decisions, and they got to the point where they actually then wanted to switch it on into active mode, where instead of saying, do you want to do this, it would say, we've done this, are you happy with this? So it's just shifting that dial very slowly.
And you said that it takes generally about 3 months for this process to happen within the companies that you have seen use the product.
Typically, yeah, I mean, it does really depend. I think a few months is quite typical for a company to want to do that. That said, after WannaCry happened, a lot of people switched it on quite much sooner, right? Because that happened on a Friday evening, and they're thinking, well, when's that going to happen next? And I'm not, I've got to have my mobile phone. And the problem is, you need to respond in 2 seconds. Anti-Gina responds on average in 2 seconds, and that's the kind of speeds we need to be moving towards if we're really going to fight AI against AI. Right.
All right. So thank you very much to everybody and to Emily for the very interesting conversation, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira and Emily.